there are a lot of interesting things to say about atheists or atheism, precisely because essentially at the end of the day, one values atheists. They're human beings. They're worthwhile, and therefore, their lives actually matter.
Which is very easy to lose sight of when you're in a position like I am, and you're constantly debating them. You see them almost as cockroaches that need to be stamped out. Quite honestly, no. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm a bad critic because I feel no agape love for these people. I consider them pests.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
They are cockroaches. They are murderers. We are the majority. They are a minority of traitors and invaders. We will squash their infestation.
When you're in a position like I am, and you're constantly debating them, you see them almost as cockroaches that need to be stamped out.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that little show of Christian love. In case you didn't recognize the movie those clips were from, it's Hotel Rwanda. Now, of course, I don't think what's-his-face there really wants to stamp out the atheists, or that Missing the Mark genuinely finds the thought of that funny. They're clearly both just stuck in that edgy teenage Christian phase. Pretty typical. But yeah, that is not a good look. And that defensiveness in the comments, hilarious. But that's not the only good part in that stream. In fact, the whole thing is a goldmine of Christian comedy, so let's take a peek through. I'd encourage you to watch the whole thing if you get a kick out of cringe. It's like a couple hours long and there's a lot in there.
Hey!
What's that?
This is the Deflating Atheism 1K subs special.
Hey, congratulations, man.
We have Christopher Lansdowne,
who runs the channel Missing the Mark. This is the guy who chuckled at that cockroach thing. So I sent him this one tweet pointing out that maybe that wasn't such a good thing, in a tone that I would expect him to approve of, given what he said in this hangout.
Especially on Twitter, in other places too. Like, I'm not always overly polite to people.
And blocked. Now, ordinarily I wouldn't bring this up because, honestly, who cares? It's just a block. It's not like it infringes on my free speech or anything. It doesn't stop me from replying to his videos if I want to. Really doesn't do much of anything. Doesn't even stop me from looking at his tweets. So, who cares? But the funny thing is, someone followed up with him about me, and he said he's not interested in dealing with me because I'm not skilled at understanding spoken English, which I guess must refer to the only interaction we've ever had, which is the statement from Deflating Atheism that he finds it easy to lose sight of the fact that atheists' lives matter, and so he starts seeing us as cockroaches who need to be stamped out just for disagreeing with him on the internet. I don't see much nuance there. It seems pretty clear-cut what was being said, but apparently you, Chris, with your big, smart Christian brain, see some sophisticated nuance there that turns it into a funny joke somehow. Now, I can't help it, Chris, if God made me a poor, dumb, ignorant atheist. So could you please help a guy out and point out how he didn't say what he literally said? Thanks.
Max Kolbe, as always.
You mean Dean Esme? The ISIS nuts are better than atheists guy? The "you should silence everyone who calls me mean names" Christian SJW guy? The "people like you should be silenced and marginalized" guy? That guy? Yeah, I love that guy. According to his buddy Missing the Mark, he's a verbal street brawler.
Max is Max. And, he's a brawler. I mean, he's a conversational street brawler in many ways. And there are a lot of people for whom his approach is really, really helpful and really, really good. Essentially other street brawlers, basically. Yeah. Like they need to be dealt with on that level, and that's the level they understand.
The street brawlers are my favorite. They never back down from an argument. Except, of course, that Dean blocked me on Twitter after like 2 tweets that went against his atheist oppressor narrative. So I guess he's a verbal street brawler, but he just also really likes running away from verbal street brawls. It's too bad. I mean, I feel like we could have had some good interaction. I've really enjoyed his Twitter account, actually. I mean, this is a guy who explicitly states that he wants to oppress atheists, but simultaneously whines about how he's oppressed by atheists. That's just too rich to pass up. But if that's how he wants to be, fine, whatever. It's kind of funny that you guys have this habit of shutting down discussion at the first hint of disagreement, though. I mean, I wouldn't think that'd be really effective for gaining new converts, but hey, what do I know? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just the closest you guys can get to stamping out the cockroaches, so you have to settle for the tiny little cathartic thrill of the block button. Kinda sad, but hey, you do you. Anyway, on to something more interesting. I'm going to address random bits of this video, like I said. Or not exactly random. I mean, I went through the conversation and I picked out a few promising bits, and then I'll randomly pick from those. They hit on a lot of different topics in this stream, so I'm not even going to try to address everything that was said.
If you really want to piss them off, by the way, just invite them to give you evidence that they're honest. What? They want you to take it on faith?
Just to be clear here, when these guys say they, usually they seem to be referring to just random internet atheists they've talked to and then lumping all those individuals together to address internet atheists as a monolith. Because, really we're all just carbon copies of the same person, right? But I can't be too hard on them about that, because after all, I've probably made the same kind of stupid generalizations in the past out of convenience. I mean, hopefully not, because it's dumb, but maybe, somewhere? I don't know. Anyway, since these things aren't addressed to any particular atheist, I'll answer them as though they're addressed to me, for the sake of discussion. It's really the only way this is going to work.
I point this out to a bunch of people, like, okay, I invite you to give me evidence that you're honest, that you're asking this question honestly, or, that you actually accept evidence. I mean, do you want me to take it on faith that you accept evidence?
No, Chris. When it comes to you, I never had any serious expectation that you would actually engage at all. I said one thing to you and you immediately turned to the block button, and that's pretty much what I predicted. Frankly, if I were to expect anything better from anyone in your little pack of idiots, that would be lunacy. But let's say hypothetically that I started off thinking that you were better than that. Would I expect you to take it on faith that I'm honest? Well, no. Obviously not. What I would expect is that if you were a person with an average or even slightly sub-average level of intellectual honesty, you would find it best to begin with no assumptions about my honesty, and then approach me as someone who you haven't yet identified as either typically honest or typically dishonest. An intelligent person might use our conversation as an opportunity to probe my attitude and my personality in order to determine for himself if I am in fact actually open to evidence and actually asking questions honestly. I have no particular interest in what answer you ultimately settle on, or indeed if you're even intellectually honest enough to evaluate my behavior fairly, or even put the slightest bit of effort into answering the question in the first place. I mean, it's not like I place a high importance on your opinion. All I expect is that you would take responsibility for your own mind and form your own opinions. Or don't, if that's really what you want to do. If you want to be like your buddy Dean there and just assume everything an atheist says, even about their own opinions, is a lie by default, and just turn yourself into a gigantic lol cow, that's your business. It's all up to you. Because, Chris, I am not your father.
I actually made a video specifically about how I'm not trying to prove to them that God exists.
Yes.
Is the one I titled, Dear Lack of Belief Atheists, I'm Not Your Father.
All right, what next? How about this bit where they're talking about a Jacqueline Glenn video? Now, there are actually a lot of times in this hangout where they just talk shit about various people, and mostly I'm not interested in defending anyone else, since most of them can defend themselves, or they're dead, and so they don't need anyone to defend them. But this one is really short, and it's so artfully wrong that it's worth addressing.
In which in the first minute, she said first that atheism is not a position, it's merely a lack of belief, and then answered the second question with, well, you can't hate somebody that you don't think exists. And so in just a moment, she then claimed that God, based her argument on God not existing.
Yes.
And as he put it, she couldn't go 17 seconds without this.
Just going to give my audience a second to catch up with that if they haven't. And we're good. Hey, Chris, if you lack a belief in something, that means you don't think it exists. So that argument is not based on God not existing. It's based on her not believing God exists. Somehow, you've managed to confuse somebody you don't think exists with somebody you think doesn't exist. And this is such a basic distinction that I have no idea how you even thought you had a point, but I guess I shouldn't expect better given that what I've seen of you does not exactly suggest that you're skilled at understanding spoken English.
I pointed out to one guy that, well, you're at least making the implicit claim that it is possible the world could exist without God. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, I'm not. Okay, so you don't believe in God, but you don't even think it's possible that the world could exist without God.
What exactly is untenable about that position? Maybe it won't be so clear to everyone right away why his statement can be perfectly sensible, so I'll explain. To establish that something is possible requires one of two things. First, having some kind of evidence of it. You may not know anything about how it's possible or how it works, but it's happening right there, so clearly it is possible. Of course, we have to operate on the assumption that the whole universe isn't an illusion or something, but I think considering who I'm talking to here, it's safe to assume that we can agree that that's a reasonable assumption that we can both share. Anyway, the second way is to have some kind of understanding of the relevant aspects of reality that informs you that yes, whatever we're talking about is in fact possible. That is, it's consistent with the nature of reality, even if we've never witnessed it. Now, you'll often hear the assertion, God is possible, just thrown out with no support. And that immediately raises the question of, how do you know? There's more to possibility than just being able to conceive of it being possible. To say that God is possible requires more knowledge than I think these people realize. You have to have somehow discovered that the ultimate nature of reality, be it physical or otherwise, is capable of supporting such a non-physical thinking being. That it's possible for something, anything, to exist before and outside the universe, for lack of better terminology. That an entity can exist that can conjure something, in this case an entire universe, from nothing, with, in the case of Christianity, words. That it's possible for a being to perceive every particle without affecting them in any way, and to physically move each and every particle with no physical mechanism, and so on, and so on, and so on. This flippant assertion that God is possible asserts such an extreme depth of understanding of reality that there's no way I can accept that any human actually possesses it. And a similar problem could be seen to exist from the opposite side, that to have a compelling reason to believe that the universe is possible without God, you have to know more than we know now about what is and is not possible. And by the way, Chris, there's a marginally compelling argument in there somewhere against the God doesn't exist type atheist if you're clever enough to assemble it. You can have that one for free. Next time you're going to have to pay me. I'm not here to beef up your apologetics for you. But remember, you're not talking to a God does not exist type atheist in your scenario. You're complaining about atheists who say that they just don't believe that God exists. So this guy doesn't even necessarily believe that the universe originated without a God at all. He's just not convinced that it did. So if he's not going around claiming the universe is possible without God, that's perfectly consistent with his stated position on the God question. Just as he doesn't have to commit to a yes or no answer about whether God exists, he also doesn't have to commit to a yes or no answer about whether the universe is possible without a God. When you don't actually know something, I don't know is a perfectly valid position. If he just feels like he doesn't have enough information and so he just avoids making ignorant claims based on information he thinks he doesn't have, that's respectable. That's what he should be doing. You should respect that if you have the slightest respect for intellectual honesty and truth itself. And yet instead, you've chose to sit around talking about him like he's an idiot for it. Like he should pretend to have certain knowledge about the universe that he actually doesn't have. Is that really how you approach these questions, Chris? By puffing yourself up and pretending to have all the answers that you don't have? Because that's what you're insisting this guy should do. You know, this is honestly unbelievable, man. You clearly can't grasp the difference between not believing something is possible and believing it's impossible. Earlier, you showed that you don't understand the difference between not believing something exists and believing something doesn't exist. And so I think I'm starting to realize why in this hangout you guys spend so much time complaining about lack of belief atheists.
Dear lack of belief atheists, I'm not your father. The lack of belief atheists annoy the heck out of me when they're talking. The lack of belief atheists piss me off because they're so unwilling to have a position.
The I lack a belief will never own their own premises.
It's because you don't even have a solid enough grasp on spoken English to understand what a lack of belief atheist even is. If you can't get a grip on simple terminology and how the order of words affects a sentence, then how are you supposed to understand the position that they're describing? In fact, you're so demonstrably unskilled at comprehending even the most basic linguistic subtleties that it comes off like a parody. You come off like a Saturday Night Live sketch. But you're not a parody, you're not a sketch. You're just actually this incompetent. And so you end up saying insane things like what I'm about to play, where you say that you respect people more who just look around at the universe and go, clearly there's no God here, with no argument to back it up.
I actually have a fair amount of respect for atheists who will say, who will take the noetic approach and say that I look at the world and this is clearly a world that does not have a God, that does not have a God. Anyone who will actually do that, if they simply say like, I don't have an argument for it, I simply look out on the world and this is what I see, and I know this to be the case, I respect that. Now, I also respect somebody who looks out in the world and says like, well, obviously there's a God in charge of this. Neither one of those is an argument in favor of it. But I respect both of those as people willing to have a position, and just because you can't articulate an argument for your position doesn't make the position illegitimate.
And right after that is when you say that the lack of belief atheists piss you off because they're unwilling to have a position.
The lack of belief atheists piss me off because they're so unwilling to have a position.
Yeah.
So not only does your clear and obvious deficiency in understanding spoken English cause you to recoil at the lack of belief atheist, but so does your apparent lack of concern for whether someone has any reasoning at all, good or bad, to back up their position. The only people you respect are those who make sweeping assertions and hold firm beliefs about the fundamental nature of reality, even if they have to do that with literally nothing to support those beliefs, not even one single lame argument. And even if they're completely ignorant on the subject, and so just as likely wrong as they are right. And at the same time, you ridicule the people who prefer to wait until they have solid enough reasoning for the position they settle on, so that they don't settle on positions based on nothing more than ignorance and feels. Well, everyone who's undecided about any issue at all, you heard the man. Even if you don't find your information or your arguments anywhere near good enough to support either the hard yes or the hard no position on any issue, even if the reasons you've heard for either side don't convince you at all, you should pick one for no good reason at all, or you might risk having these mental deficients missing the mark and deflating atheism scoff at you. Oh no! Forget careful thought and reasoning, forget making decisions based on a good understanding and a solid argument, forget believing true things, forget truth in general. Believing true things is not a goal anyone should have. The only thing people should be interested in is making random decisions based on nothing. Because let's be real, of what use has good reasoning and the pursuit of truth ever been to humanity? None, right? So forget whether you're even intellectually convinced of whatever position you randomly start asserting is true. Don't worry if you have no idea if it's actually true. You need to decide right now, not just for no good reason, but for no reason at all. Come on, you coward, put that blindfold on, spin around a few times, and take that shot. Who cares if you hit the target or literally anything or anyone else? At least you were willing to take the shot! I respect that!
I still remember there's no evidence for God's...
Which God, yes.
Yes, which God is there no evidence for? Now, of course, in my experience, they'll all just say, all of them! There's no evidence for any God. And just to sort of add into this, I actually had Eve Canine make a meme for me, which has a picture of the sun and a picture of the moon. And it says, picture of the earth and a picture of the sun, saying two gods that, theoretically speaking, atheists don't believe in. The god Helios and the goddess Gaia.
Yes.
Maybe you should have thought that slogan through.
Yes.
Because I think there's some evidence for the sun and the moon. And I'm sorry, well, the moon is a god too, but, and the earth. I kind of think there is some evidence for those gods.
Chris, Helios and Gaia were more than just the sun and the earth. They had minds and personalities. That's what made them gods. If we're to say there's actual evidence for the existence of the gods, Gaia and Helios, that is what we need evidence for. Then we could say that the sun and the earth are actually gods instead of just the mindless objects that they appear to be. The mere existence of the sun and the earth are not evidence that the characters made up by the Greeks actually reflect reality in any way at all. There is zero evidence that the sun and the earth really have minds and wills and personalities and had kids and that kind of thing, and that the stories from Greek mythology are actually true. There was no evidence of it when they made those stories up, and there's no evidence of it now. It's like trying to tell me that if a child thinks their pet rock is alive, that's evidence of a living rock. It's complete nonsense. But even though your objection is incredibly silly, I think I understand the point that you're ham-fistedly trying to make, which is what exactly it would mean to say that the evidence for all gods is lacking. And of course that comes down to exactly how you would define the word God. Say you visited some remote tribe and you found them worshipping a stick. Nothing special, just a stick. And they say, "This is our God," and so you ask, "Oh, what does your God do? Does it speak?" No, doesn't speak. Does it listen to you? No. Does it do anything at all? Control the weather, make the trees grow, move 1 inch a day? No. So what makes it a god? Well, nothing, it's just a stick. We call it Bob the Stick, and it's our god. Is that a god, Chris? Does that stick's existence provide evidence of Bob the Stick God? I don't see how. I mean, if you broaden the definition out so much that it loses all meaning, all use, sure, I guess maybe you can include it, but why? You'd just be giving up a relatively useful word for no purpose.
But yeah, I really like that one about okay, so there seems to be evidence for Kim Jong-il existing.
Yeah,
I guess
that's pretty solid evidence. If North Koreans are not atheists because they believe Kim Jong-il is a god, then I think there's pretty solid evidence Kim Jong-il exists.
So at first I was really unsure what point you were even trying to make, because my brain just refused to comprehend something this stupid. But after putting a little bit of thought into the garbled mess that you're spewing out and watching the original Hacking Atheism video that you guys are discussing right now, I think I figured out what you're trying to say. Atheists should not believe that North Koreans who believe Kim Jong-il is a god are theists, because those atheists say there's no evidence for any god, but there is evidence for Kim Jong-il's existence, and so atheists should believe that Kim Jong-il cannot be numbered among the gods that people believe in, even if people worship him as one, because otherwise they're implicitly admitting that there is a god that there's evidence for? Ha ha ha, gotcha, apparently. I mean, that's the smartest I can make it sound. Look, if we were talking about the Bob the Stick people whose God shows no sign whatsoever of matching any definition of God that you or I or pretty much anyone would find useful, then I might join you in questioning if it's really justifiable to label them theists. Although the fact that they call their stick a god and worship it as such kind of complicates things. But that's not what we're dealing with here, is it? The god characters of the Kims have a lot more features of the god definition that I think is useful than Bob the Stick does. Now, as for the evidence part, yeah, Kim Jong-il existed. There's no evidence he was a god, though. No evidence at all that he could do anything remotely superhuman. No evidence that he transcended the laws of nature in any way. No evidence that he created anything in the theistic sense. Yeah, if Kim Jong-il is seen as a god by people, that makes them theists. They believe he is a god, and that makes them theists. But that doesn't mean they're right. Their belief is not evidence that Kim Jong-il is a god. Evidence of the existence of Kim Jong-il the man is not evidence of Kim Jong-il the god. You can't just point at a random thing like, I don't know, my car, and say, that's my god, and expect me to seriously consider the existence of my car as evidence that there really is a god and it's my car. The fact that you apparently disagree is just shockingly stupid.
I think they almost purposefully make it where if you were to unpack everything that was dumb in their sentences, you'd seriously need like half an hour. I think they almost do that by design.
Oh, believe me, the feeling is mutual. And speaking of which, that's about all I can take for now, but I've barely even scratched the surface of the idiocy on display in this hangout, so I might do a second part if my audience is into it. But for now, audience, if you want to be guaranteed that you get updates about my videos, go to list.logicked.com, type in your email, click submit, you'll be on my email list, and you'll get emails about videos 1 day before they're published. And if you want videos 2 days early and to get on this fancy list right here, you can go pledge $5 or more on Patreon. These are all the people who've elected to do that, and they are the lifeblood of this channel, them and everybody else on Patreon. They are the reason this channel keeps running. And speaking of which, if you want updates about videos or just to communicate with me, follow me on Twitter at Logicked. We have lots of fun over there. And that's it. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.